You spend enough years on the blacktop, you learn a few things. First, the road doesn't care about you. Not your schedule, not your family, not the aches in your bones. It was here long before you, and it'll be here long after you're just a ghost in a logbook. Second, you learn that the world is a lot stranger than folks in office buildings and suburban homes will ever believe. They live in a small, well-lit room, and they think that's the whole house. Out here, in the dark, you see the real size of the place. You see things in the deep woods of the Pacific Northwest, hear things in the whispered winds of the plains, and you feel things in the desert that freeze the sweat on your skin. Most times, you just push the pedal down, sip your lukewarm coffee, and keep it to yourself. No one wants to hear the ramblings of a tired man whose only company is the hum of 18 wheels and the static between radio stations. But this thing I saw in Utah, this thing stuck with me. It's a burr under my skin. It's the reason I don't sleep so well anymore, and the reason I sometimes take the long way around even if it costs me a day and a half in diesel. I was hauling a load of machine parts from Oakland to Denver, a straight shot across Nevada and Utah on I-80. It's a run I've done 100 times, a hypnotizing, soul-crushingly empty stretch of road. Once you get past Reno, the world just sort of ends. It bleeds into scrub desert, then mountains, then more desert. But the worst part, the part that plays tricks on you even on a clear day, is the Bonneville Salt Flats. If you've never seen them, you can't imagine it. It's not just white. It's a vicious, blinding white that robs the world of color and depth. The sun hits it and bounces back up at you, frying your eyes from above and below. The heat bakes the air into a shimmering curtain, making solid things wobble and dance like ghosts. The horizon dissolves. You can't tell where the ground ends and the sky begins. It's like driving across the floor of heaven, or maybe the surface of the moon. I was rolling through in the late afternoon. The sun was hanging low and angry to my left. A huge orange furnace getting ready to dip behind the mountains. The glare was brutal. I had my visor down, sunglasses on, and still I was seeing spots. That's trucker's blindness for you. You stare at the shimmering asphalt for 10 hours straight, and your brain starts to fill in the blanks with its own garbage. You see phantom deer, shadows that look like stalled cars, black dogs that vanish when you get closer. You learn to ignore them. You have to, or you'll go crazy. So when I first saw the shape, I ignored it. It was way out on the shoulder, standing on the crust of the salt flat itself, a dark, thin silhouette against that impossible white. Oh man, that was my first thought. What the hell is some poor bastard doing out there? Broke down? But there was no car, no tracks leading from the road, nothing. Just this one still figure. My mind started cycling through the possibilities. A tourist who'd wandered too far and gotten heat stroke? A prank? I'd seen some weird art installations out in the desert before, life-sized iron coyotes and such. Maybe it was something like that. As my Peterbilt ate up the distance, the shape got clearer, more defined. The late sun caught it, and that's when the hairs on my arms stood up. It wasn't dark. It was the opposite. It was shining, sparkling, like a million tiny diamonds were embedded in it. The light passed through it in some places. It was the figure of a man, all right? Perfect in its proportions. One arm slightly raised as if waving hello or goodbye. Head tilted a bit, like he was listening for something. But he wasn't made of flesh or metal or stone. He was made of salt. I could see the crystalline structures, the jagged, translucent edges. He looked like one of those giant salt crystals you see in a museum, only carved into the shape of a man by a master sculptor and left out there to greet the sun. It was beautiful and terrifying and all at once. There was this feeling pouring off it, a sense of immense age and immense sorrow, like this thing had been standing there since the ancient siege dried up, waiting.
I eased my foot off the accelerator, the rumble of the Cummins engine dropping a few decibels. My brain was screaming that this was impossible. My eyes were telling my brain to shut the hell up. I was 50 yards away, then 30, then right alongside it. It was real. I could have reached out my window and touched it. And in that instant, as I looked right at it, I could have sworn its head turned just a fraction of an inch to look at me.
My heart hammered against my ribs like a piston with a bad bearing. Your eyes play tricks on you in the heat days. I know that. But this wasn't the haze. This was clear. The air right beside my cab was sharp, and the figure was perfectly defined. That slight turn of its crystalline head felt as real as the steering wheel in my hands. It wasn't an aggressive movement. It felt questioning, like it was as surprised to see me as I was to see it. The instinct to slam on the brakes was overwhelming. A part of my mind, the part that still believed in a logical world, wanted to get out, take a picture, touch it, prove it was real, prove it was just some clever piece of art. But a deeper, older part of my brain, the lizard part that's kept us alive since the Stone Age, was screaming bloody murder. It was screaming one word, over and over, wrong, wrong, wrong. This thing didn't belong. It wasn't just out of place. It felt like it had been torn out of some other reality and pasted into ours, and the universe was straining at the seams trying to reject it. There was no joy in it, like you'd find in art. There was only a profound and silent desolation, the feeling you get standing in a graveyard at midnight.
I didn't stop. I couldn't. I just kept my hands locked on the wheel, my eyes glued to the thing as I passed. I could see the detail of its creation now, the individual salt crystals that made up its skin, the larger, clearer ones that formed what looked like eyes. There were cracks running through its torso, ancient-looking fissures, as if it were barely holding itself together. And the whole time, that sense of deep, patient sadness washed over my cab, a cold wave in the middle of the baking heat.
I was maybe a quarter mile past it when I finally looked in my passenger side mirror. I had to see it one last time, to burn the image into my memory, to prove to myself later that I hadn't just hallucinated the whole thing. It was still there, a glittering speck against the white expanse. Then, as I watched, something happened. A tremor seemed to run through it, a slight, violent shiver, as if a low-frequency sound I couldn't hear had just hit it. The raised arm fell, not like a breaking statue, but like a collapsing wave. It disintegrated into a shower of brilliant dust. Then the shoulder went, and the head, and the torso. It didn't fall over, it just unbecame. A cascade of sparkling salt and powder, sloughing off and collapsing in on itself until there was nothing left but a small, shimmering mound on the white earth. The whole thing took maybe 3 seconds. Silent, graceful almost. One moment, a man of salt. The next, a pile of dust in the wind.
My breath hitched in my throat. I felt a chill so cold it was like ice water being injected straight into my veins. I wanted to floor it, to put that place 100 miles behind me. But my eyes were still locked on the mirror. The fine salt dust was already being carried away by the light desert wind, thinning out until it was just a faint haze. And then I saw it. Where the figure's feet had been, there was something else. The dust pile wasn't the only thing left. There was a dark shape, something small and black. A rock. A piece of black volcanic rock, totally out of place on the white salt flat. And I could just make out something pale tucked under its edge. Something flat and rectangular. A piece of paper. A note. The rock was holding it down against the wind. It was lying there, right where the impossible man had stood just moments before. An invitation. A question. An answer! Something!
My truck was still coasting, the speedometer dropping to 45. The thought was a fire in my skull. Stop, go back, read it. It was right there. I could pull over, walk 100 yards, and I would know. But that feeling of wrongness came back, 10 times stronger. It was a physical pressure in my ears. I imagined myself walking out there, the salt crunching under my boots. I imagined picking up that stone, feeling its unnatural coldness. I imagined reading the words on that paper, and a voice deep in my gut told me with absolute certainty that if I read that note, I would never be the same. That some doors, once you open them, can never be closed again. The choice hung in the air for a single, terrible second. I stomped on the accelerator. The engine roared, black smoke coughed from the stacks, and the rig lurched forward. I didn't look in the mirror again. I looked straight ahead at the endless white line on the endless black road, my knuckles white on the wheel, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest, and I drove.
You can't outrun a memory. A Kenworth for a Peterbilt will get you from Utah to Colorado in 8 hours, but a thought can make that trip in less than a second. For the rest of that day's drive, and all through the night, the man of salt stood in the passenger seat beside me. He didn't speak. He just shimmered in my peripheral vision. The image of him crumbling, turning to dust, replayed in my mind on an endless loop. Every logical part of my brain was working overtime, trying to file the experience away. It was a mirage, a trick of the heat and the light and the fatigue. Or it was an elaborate art piece designed with some kind of seismic trigger or a remote detonator to collapse as cars passed by. Some desert weirdo's idea of a joke. The note? Part of the prank. Father just said, "You been punked," or something equally stupid. I tried to believe it. I repeated it to myself like a prayer. It was a gag. It was a mirage. It wasn't real. But my body knew better. My skin was still crawling. Every time I hit a bump, I'd jump, expecting to see the dashboard dissolve into dust. I cranked up the radio, blasting some forgotten country station out of Cheyenne, anything to fill the screaming silence in the cab. But the silence was inside my own head.
I made it to a truck stop just over the Wyoming line, well after midnight. The place was a familiar islet of greasy light and an ocean of darkness. The smell of diesel and frying bacon should have been comforting, but it wasn't. Everything felt off. I felt like I was watching myself through a dirty piece of glass. I went inside to grab coffee. The woman behind the counter gave me the same tired smile she gives every trucker, but to me, it looked like a skull's grin. I sat down in the booth, the vinyl sticking to my jeans. I lifted the heavy ceramic mug to my lips, and the coffee tasted wrong. It is bitter, of course, but underneath that there was another taste, faint, but unmistakable. Salt. I put the mug down, my stomach churning. Probably just a dirty coffee pot, I told myself.
I went to the restroom to splash some water on my face. The face staring back at me from the stained mirror looked 10 years older than it had that morning. There were dark circles under my eyes, and my skin looked dry, pasty. I could see the fine lines around my eyes etched deeper than before, filled with something that looked like fine, white dust. I rubbed my cheek. A fine, gritty powder came away on my fingertips. I started scrubbing my face frantically with a fistful of scratchy paper towels, soap, and cold water. It had to be road dust. That's all. I'd had the window down for a bit. That's what I told myself. But when I was done, my skin still felt tight, stretched, and dehydrated, like it was slowly turning to parchment. And the taste was still in my mouth, a dry, briny tang, like I'd just taken a mouthful of ocean water. I threw the wet paper towels in the trash and leaned against the sink, breathing heavily. My reflection stared back, wide-eyed and spooked. It was then I noticed it. In the dead silence of the empty restroom, punctuated only by the drip of a leaky faucet, there was another sound. A quiet, rhythmic scraping noise. Shh. Shh. It sounded like fine sand being brushed across the stone floor. It was faint, almost too quiet to be real. I held my breath, listening. It stopped. I let my breath out. It started again, a little closer this time. Shh. Shh. It sounded like it was coming from just outside the door. My blood ran cold. It was the sound of something dragging itself along, something dry, something heavy. I thought about the crumbling man. I thought about that pile of dust, and in my terrified mind I pictured that dust reforming, pulling itself together from the ether, taking shape again. I imagined it dragging itself across the parking lot, following the scent of the man who had seen it and driven away. The man who had left its message lying unread on the salt flats. The scraping stopped right outside the door. I was paralyzed. My heart was a block of ice in my chest. I stared at the bottom of the door, at the little crack of light, waiting for a shadow to fall across it. I waited for what felt like an eternity.
Nothing happened. The silence returned, absolute this time. Eventually, after minutes that stretched into years, I found the courage to move. I burst out of the restroom, ready to fight or run. The hallway was empty. The diner was empty except for the cook in the back and the tired woman behind the counter who looked up at me, startled. "Everything all right, honey?" she asked. "Yeah," I croaked, my voice hoarse. "Yeah, just long day." I paid for my coffee, went back to my rig, locked the doors, and wedged my spare jacket against the window. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there in the dark, listening, with a constant, nagging desolate on my tongue.
In this line of work, you get used to being haunted. Not by ghosts in the traditional sense, but by memories, by the faces of people you leave behind, by the miles you can never get back. The road becomes your life, and your life becomes a collection of towns you've only seen at 3 a.m. and diners where you've had 1,000 conversations with people whose names you never knew. You learn to live with a certain level of melancholy. But this was different. This wasn't a memory that faded with time. It was a presence that grew stronger. I started avoiding I-80 through Utah. I'd take the 70 through Colorado, or even dip all the way down to the 40 if I could justify it, adding hundreds of miles in a full day to my runs. My dispatcher started getting pissed, asking why I was burning so much extra fuel. I made up excuses. Bad weather reports, a nasty rumor about highway patrol setting up a way station from hell. He bought it for a while.
But you can't outrun a highway forever. And the thing I saw, it wasn't tied to a location anymore. It was tied to me. It started in small ways. I'd be driving through the lush green forests of Oregon, 1,000 miles from any salt flat, and I'd catch a scent on the air through my vent, a dry mineral smell, the smell of a dead sea. I'd be checking my load at a stop in Texas, in the humid, soupy air of the Gulf, and I'd feel a gritty texture on the latch of my trailer door, a fine powder that would vanish when I tried to look at it directly. The salt was with me. The hallucinations, whatever they were, got worse. A white plastic grocery bag snagged on a barbed wire fence in Nebraska would, for a split second, look like a beckoning hand, skeletal and crystalline. A pile of snow pushed to the side of the road in the dead of winter in Montana would momentarily take the form of a man, head cocked, watching me pass. These glimpses lasted no longer than a heartbeat, but each one left me with a jolt of ice-cold adrenaline, my hands shaking on the wheel.
My life in the cab, once a peaceful solitude, became a prison of paranoia. I started hearing that soft scraping sound at night when I tried to sleep in my bunk. I'd sit bolt upright, sweat-soaked, staring into the darkness of the cab, listening. It always sounded like it was coming from just outside my door, or worse, from inside the trailer.
One time, I was hauling a load of California oranges to Chicago. The sweet citrus smell usually filled the cab, but that whole trip, all I could smell was brine and dust. And I started to hear a sound from the back, a low, grinding, shifting noise. It was the sound of 10 tons of granular material settling, the sound of a dump truck full of sand. I knew it was impossible. My load was pallets of oranges, packed tight. They don't shift. They don't grind. Halfway through Iowa, I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled into a rest area in the middle of the night, my heart pounding with a nameless dread. I got out, grabbed my flashlight and tire iron, and went to the back of the trailer. I unlocked the heavy doors, my hands trembling. I expected to be buried in an avalanche of salt, to see a reformed creature of crystal emerge from the darkness. I took a deep breath and swung the doors open. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness. Pallets of oranges stacked neatly, secured with straps, exactly as they'd been loaded. The air smelled sweet and fruity. There was no dust, no salt, nothing out of place at all. I stood there for a long time, the flashlight beam shaking, feeling like a complete fool. And worse than a fool, I felt like I was losing my mind. The line between the road and my nightmares was disappearing. I started to change. I used to be a guy who'd sit at the counter at a truck stop, swap stories with the other drivers, bitch about fuel prices, talk about the game. Now I just took my food to go, ate in my cab, doors locked. The other drivers started looking at me funny. I was gaunt. My eyes were always bloodshot. And I had this habit of constantly rubbing my arms and face like I was trying to wipe something off my skin. I guess I had the look of a man who's coming apart at the seams. And I was. The salt man wasn't just a memory haunting me. He was grinding me down, day by day, mile by mile, turning me into dust just like him.
It came to a head on a lonely stretch of highway in Arizona about a year after it all began. It was 3 a.m, and the world was nothing but my headlights, the 2 yellow lines they illuminated, and an endless, crushing darkness. The scraping sound started again, only this time it wasn't coming from outside. It was inside the cab with me. Shh, 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 coming from the passenger seat. I risked a glance. For a single horrifying moment, the seat wasn't empty. A figure made of shimmering, pale light was sitting there. It had the same shape as the salt man, but it was translucent, like a heat-hazed mirage brought to life. It turned its featureless head toward me, and in the deafening silence of the cab, a voice spoke. It wasn't a voice I heard with my ears, but one that bloomed inside my skull. A dry, whispering rustle like dead leaves blowing across pavement. "You didn't read it," I screamed. It was a raw, terrified sound. I swerved, the tires of my trailer screeching on the asphalt as the rig jackknifed. I wrestled with the wheel, my whole body shaking, and managed to bring the truck to a shuddering halt on the shoulder, its nose pointed back the way I'd come. When I looked back at the passenger seat, it was empty. The voice was gone, but the words remained, burnt into my brain. "You didn't read it."
That was the breaking point. I sat there for an hour, the engine idling, the air brakes hissing, staring into the darkness. I finally understood. This thing, this presence, this memory, it wasn't going to fade. It wasn't going to let me go. It had latched onto me because I had seen it and because I had run. There was an unfinished piece of business lying on a salt flat in Utah, and it was a debt I was going to have to pay. The not knowing had become a cancer, far worse than any truth the note could possibly hold. I turned the rig around right there on the empty highway. I called my dispatcher on the radio, told him I was quitting, dropping the load to the next yard and heading home. I had a family emergency, I said. He yelled, he threatened, but I didn't care. I just dropped the receiver and kept driving east. The drive back to the Bonneville Salt Flats was the strangest of my life. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but underneath it was something else, a grim sense of purpose. For the first time in a year, I wasn't running away from the memory. I was driving toward it. The scraping sound stopped. The mirages on the roadside vanished. The taste of salt in my mouth faded. It was like the whole world was holding his breath, waiting to see what I would do. I reached the salt flats in the late afternoon, the same time of day as before. The sun was in the same spot in the sky. The glare was just as brutal. I slowed the rig down, scanning the side of the road, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm. I was terrified the spot would be gone, that the whole monotonous landscape would have swallowed it up. But then I saw it. A particular outcropping of rocks in the distant mountains that I had used as a landmark. That was the place. I pulled the whole rig over onto the shoulder, the engine rumbling like a sleeping beast. I killed the ignition. The silence that fell was absolute, deafening. I opened my door and stepped out. The heat hit me like a physical blow. I squinted against the white, the salt crunching under my boots as I walked toward the spot. It was exactly as I remembered it. The vast, cracked expanse, the shimmering air. I walked to where he had stood. There was nothing. No mound of dust, no shimmer in the air, just the flat, empty salt, baked and cracked under the sun. My heart sank. Had it really all been a dream? Had I thrown away my job, my sanity, for a waking nightmare?
I knelt, running my hand over the rough, salty ground. I dug my fingers into the crust, hoping to find something, anything. A different color grain of salt, a fragment of something. But it was nothing. It was clean, wiped away by a year of wind and weather. It was over. It was nothing. I felt a wave of despair and a strange, hollow relief all at once. I lost my mind. I was just another crazy, sleep-deprived trucker. I stood up, turning to go back to my truck, to whatever was left of my life. And then a glint of light caught my eye. It wasn't where the man had stood. It was about 10 feet away, lying half buried in a crack in the salt crust. A single, dark object. A small piece of black, volcanic rock. The stone. I stumbled toward it, my breath catching in my throat. I knelt down. There was no note. The wind, the rain, the snow must have taken it long ago. The story was gone forever. But as I reached for the stone, my fingers brushed something in the salt. Something small and hard. I dug it out of the crust. It wasn't a rock. It was a crystal of pure, clear salt. But it wasn't a random shape. It was perfectly, impossibly formed. It was shaped like a single, solidified human teardrop. I picked it up. It was cold in my hand, as cold as a piece of ice. Then, as my skin warmed it, an unnatural heat bloomed from within, a searing heat that made me want to drop it, but I couldn't. I just stared at it, lying in my palm. A teardrop made of salt, left behind by a man who had crumbled into dust. I don't know how long I knelt there. The sun began to set, painting the white flats in shades of orange and purple. Eventually, I closed my fist around the salt crystal, the heat subsiding to a steady warmth, and walked back to my truck. I placed it on the dashboard, where it caught the last rays of sunlight and glittered like a lonely star. I started the engine and pulled back onto the highway. I don't know if finding it ended the hunting or just started a new chapter. I don't know what the note said or what the man on the Salt Flats was waiting for. I only know that I saw him, and that sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone on a dark road, I can see the teardrop on my dashboard begin to glow with a soft, sorrowful light, and I just keep driving. What else is there to do?